the political and policy landscape across the nation, and the impacts of the international momentum towards net zero emissions on our clean energy journey here in Australia. So you can see it really does cover the full spectrum of what's going on. And I know you're all hungry for information, but also time poor in this race to net zero. And so today, our aim is to make it as easy for you as possible to get across the latest information with this 1 hour talkie version of the Clean Energy Australia report. Yes, together with a fabulous lineup of industry experts, we'll be taking you through many of the key points from the report and also delving into the story behind the numbers in a panel discussion that follows a couple of our opening presentations. So, without any further ado, let me now introduce the Clean Energy Council's CEO, who probably needs no introduction, Kane Thornton, who will provide an overview of the current state of play in the clean energy transition. Over to you, Kane.
Thanks, Anna, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Well, what another extraordinary year for the Australian clean energy sector. I'll touch shortly on what happened in 2023. That's obviously the focus of the report. But what the report also does is tells us the story of where are we on the journey. And I think really the biggest headline from this report is that we are now right on 40% of Australia's electricity coming from renewable energy sources. And that's quite an extraordinary achievement. It means that we've pretty well doubled from around 15% of our energy coming from renewables only 5 years ago. We've more than doubled that to right on 40%. And it also means now that we are renewable energy is the most significant source of generation in our energy mix in Australia. And that's a very significant milestone and something that those of us in the clean energy industry should be extraordinarily proud of. That figure also, I think, gives us confidence and hope that we can get to those more ambitious targets of 82% renewables by 2030. And indeed, we are now well on our journey to becoming 100% renewable energy powered. So that's the big picture for clean energy in Australia at this moment in time. The other obvious outcome, and what the report really shines a light on, is some really quite extraordinary progress throughout the course of 2023. And the biggest of those comes in the form of big batteries. It was a breakthrough year for big batteries in Australia, an extraordinary level of new financial commitments made into big batteries throughout the course of 2023. And I think this really is the industry, the energy market responding to the obvious need for more storage, more technology to support the combination of renewable technologies. And the big battery really did deliver for Australia in 2023. Now, obviously, those projects now move towards construction. So we're going to see a very big wave of construction in big batteries coming, but an extraordinary level of activity and new financial commitments in 2023. The other big achiever in 2023, I think it's a quiet achiever, but that is Australians. All Australians who have put solar panels on the roof of their home, again, did some really heavy lifting on the energy transition throughout 2023. Over 300,000 homes, now over 3.7 million Australian homes with rooftop solar in Australia. So that was, on some level, it's the quiet achiever, rooftop solar, but it's doing some really heavy lifting as far as contributing to that 40% of our energy mix coming from renewables, and clearly playing an enormous role in empowering Australian homes, allowing them to respond to the cost of living challenges, and allowing them to contribute to the emissions reductions challenge for our nation and, of course, for our planet. There are a couple of the big successes and movements. There was also a lot of activity in large-scale renewable energy projects being completed and coming online and connecting into the electricity grid. Another quite strong year at that level. But really, the low light of the year was new financial commitments for large-scale renewable energy projects. A very challenging year last year, relatively low levels of new projects reaching financial close and being announced throughout the course of 2023. Now, this is obviously disappointing and challenging, and I know in our panel discussion shortly we'll discuss some of the drivers and reasons. I think it's fair to say this is happening in a moment in time where the pipeline and the opportunity for large-scale renewable projects is enormous. It's coming in a moment in time where we need to accelerate the level of new commitments in large-scale renewable energy projects in this nation. But it is also coming at a moment in time where there are some significant challenges for those large-scale renewable projects, and we'll talk about those shortly in our panel discussion. Of course, finally, the other big mover throughout the course of 2023 was government policy. We had, throughout the course of the year, and in many ways, I think, responding to those challenges, responding to the lower levels of investment in large-scale renewable energy, we had governments leaning in. Whether that was state or territory or the Commonwealth government, we saw a range of new initiatives, new commitments, a body of reform in areas like planning and approvals. We saw a whole range of commitments, whether they be budget commitments from governments in different ways for new programs, for new incentives to support clean energy, or most significantly throughout the course of 2023, in the back end of the year, we saw the federal government announce the Capacity Investment Scheme. And this really reflected the federal government doubling down on its commitment to renewable energy, doubling down on its commitment to achieve 82% renewable energy by 2030, and expanding a policy that they've already been using to support large-scale battery projects and energy storage, and expanding the Capacity Investment Scheme to really overcome those challenges for large-scale renewable energy projects and to put us back on track towards achieving 82% renewables by 2030. I'm sure we'll discuss some of the finer detail of that policy throughout the course of the next 50 minutes. But Anna, that's really a brief summary of the year that was as far as 2023. As I said, some pretty substantial and significant achievements and progress throughout the course of the year. A lot to be hopeful about, a lot to celebrate. We should be extraordinarily pleased with the progress, but equally some road bumps on the path. It's never been a linear path to go from a country historically dominated by coal and gas towards a renewable energy future, but we are well and truly on that pathway now, and the Clean Energy Australia Report 2024 tells that pretty extraordinary story and the progress we're making.
Thanks, Kane. Yeah, very exciting. And I'll just get you to linger for a moment, if you don't mind, because I guess I just wanted to briefly reflect on, you've been the CEO of the CEC now for well over a decade, and I think that's right. And, we've seen the way that renewables is regarded as a sector change a lot over the time. How significant is this for you, do you think, and how significant is the 40% mark to the industry? I know it might just seem like a number and it's just another few percent, but what does it mean in terms of the narrative, I guess, around renewables?
I think you're exactly right. If you reflect on a decade ago, renewable energy was seen as an emerging technology, something that was a bit unproven. It was sort of considered it might play a bit of a niche role. At the time there was discussion about, maybe it could get up to 10%, of the energy mix. Various stages, people were talking about 20% of Australia's electricity coming from renewables, and a lot of people had sort of shake their heads and said, that sounds a bit risky or a bit difficult or a bit complex. And so I think this milestone really reflects a coming of age for renewable energy. As I said, it is now the largest source of supply into the energy mix coming from renewables collectively. And obviously, the report breaks that down from hydro to solar in its different forms and wind. But this really is a pretty significant milestone because I think it demonstrates the capability and the sophistication of the industry. It demonstrates that we can operate the electricity grid with much higher levels of renewables, noting that it might be 40% across the country on average, but actually in some jurisdictions, South Australia, for example, It obviously is much higher and much closer to 100% for very significant periods of time. So it's a pretty significant milestone. It's also worth noting, as I said, it reflects that we've doubled the amount of renewable energy in just the last 5 years, and we know we now need to pretty well double it again between now and 2030 to get to that 82% target that the government has put in place. So we've doubled it. We need to double it again. We're halfway there. I think it can give a lot of people a lot of confidence that that target is achievable with the right settings and with a strong industry and a lot of coordination with governments, with community, with suppliers, really the whole ecosystem. So we're pointing in the right direction. It's a pretty exciting milestone, I might say. And I think sitting here 10 years ago, you probably wouldn't have imagined that we'd be in this situation today.
Well, I'm very glad we are, and I think it really gives us, especially what we've done since 2017, when this latest wave of investment really began. And effectively, we're halfway on the journey now, and we've got to complete that 82% at least as a minimum by 2030. So when you look at it in that context, it starts to, I guess, it provides some real evidence points about what can be achieved when we have that clear policy. Well, we are waiting, folks. Thank you, Kane. I'll just excuse you for a moment. We are waiting for Tristan Edis to join us, who has had some technical issues at his end. And while we wait for him, I think what we might do, and Tristan's going to give us a bit of a run through some of the key stats, graphs, indicators and trends in the report. I might just bring in a couple of our other panelists, and then we might cut away to another presentation once he gets online. So can I please introduce into the fold two of our other panelists here today. So we have Joseph Tadych, Director for Energy at Tesla for the Asia Pacific region, and is also a Director of Tesla Motors Australia, and also Alison Hawke, GM for Development at Atmos Renewables, which develops and invests in renewable energy projects and currently owns or holds a financial interest in 1.8 gigawatts of wind and solar assets across all of the NEM states. Welcome to you both.
Thanks, Anna.
I can't see Joseph yet. I'm hoping he's going to join us too. Got a few folks. Alison, let me come to you first. Your reflections briefly on the 40%. How what do you think it means in terms of the project development that you're undertaking, in terms of the conversation you're having with communities?
Yeah, look, I think it shows that there's enough behind us in the system now to have developed a good sense of what's working and what's not. So it really helps us to know where the emerging challenges will be in the future, and helps us to be able to talk to the real benefits in terms of regional employment, regional businesses, hotels, and mobilising a workforce. But it also presents challenges, because I think the 40% sort of, to me, signifies we've passed the stage of the low-hanging fruit sites on the existing network, and we're moving towards projects which are more speculative in nature, where there might be they're reliant on transmission upgrades and renewable energy zones. There might be 10 different projects vying for the capacity in that section of the network, and that can cause community angst, and it can cause a competition for resources, even for vegetation offsets in where we have critically endangered grass or habitats, and present a whole lot of social license challenges as well. So that's probably what we look at, or how we have to adapt our thinking when we're moving forward as a developer and an investor and looking at sites.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. It's really great to actually get the perspective of those building out the generation and storage and the interactions with the communities and the planning systems as part of that. So thanks, Alison. I might just check in to see if we have got Tristan Edis back online. Sorry, folks. Can we bring him to stage, please? Tristan, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Fantastic. I can hear you. It might be the right time now for a presentation, and Alison will excuse you for a moment while we hear from Tristan, who's going to run us through a little bit of a glimpse of the year that was in 2023 and where we're at in the renewable energy transition. While you get your slides ready, I'll just introduce, for those of you who do not know Tristan, and he is a bit of an industry veteran, if I can put it that way, of a younger and more sprightly age than the word veteran might suggest, with a great deal of depth of knowledge of every single number that goes into making that 39.4 or 40% renewables and how we've gotten there. So over to you, Tristan, and run us through what we need to know about 2023 and what the current state of play is.
Thanks, Anna. Can you see the slides?
We can. Yep.
Fantastic. I do apologise to the audience and the Clean Energy Council there for the joys, which is Microsoft Teams. Okay, so Green Energy Markets have been lucky enough to assist the Clean Energy Council with pulling together some of the statistics around the report. There's lots of work that goes into it from the Clean Energy Council's end, and we're more the stats and facts guys. So most of the good work and the wonderful graphics are all theirs. I can't take credit for that, but I'll give you a bit of a rundown on some of the key numbers and try and put it in a bit of historical context for people so that we've got a bit of perspective, because I think it's really important that we keep in mind some of the successes that we've achieved. I know that this year, in terms of project commitments, has not been as good as perhaps what we need and what we'd really like to see happening. But I think we've demonstrated over many years a fantastic capacity to scale this industry. So the first thing, what really was pleasing to me this year was to see us get almost through that 40% renewables share of the electricity market in the main grids. That was kind of the standout for me, that, hey, we're actually making some headway. And I mean, to put that in perspective, getting close to 40% renewables back in 2007, when they were about to legislate the new upgraded renewable energy target that was going to target 20% renewables, and we're at about 10% share. Many people said that 20% couldn't be done. That includes some pretty important people within the industry who have some very important positions of power right now. And many of them were quite adamant to me that we couldn't do 20% renewables by 2020. Now, we ended up getting to 20% renewables 2 years ahead of schedule. And that was in spite of seeing really modest growth and some poor investment commitments over a period when the Abbott government initially came to government. And but we really shook off that those doubts and that sort of investment uncertainty. And it was staggering what the industry managed to achieve in terms of getting on with building projects. And once we had a bit of stability, bit of political and policy stability, and getting through to close to 40%, I think it was quite extraordinary. So I think that's something we've always got to keep in mind, is that we've gone through tough times before, and when we get a bit of policy stability and even enthusiasm, I think Malcolm Turnbull certainly had that enthusiasm, even if his colleagues may not have, the industry can achieve great things. And I thought it'd be also helpful to pull out of the archives. I have a bit of a bad habit of hoarding documents on my hard drive, and I thought it would be nice to compare this year's report to the Clean Energy Australia report from 2013. And I think the first thing to keep in mind is obviously this percentage share, the 39.4% renewables, relative to just under 15% renewables back in 2013. The other thing that was really a nice, pleasing stat that came out was it's sort of hard to see on that slide, but renewables is 39.4% share, black coal 39.3%. So we just finally pipped them out. And that was extraordinary. I don't think anyone kind of saw that would have happened back 10 years ago. Black coal represented 50% of electricity supply in the main grids of Western Australia and the NEM. So we've finally passed that key milestone there. The other thing that was interesting is back in 2013, really most of the renewable share was coming from hydro. 55% was coming from hydro, and most of that was built before Run DMC opened the world's eyes to rap music. So I hope you get that joke and you're a fan of rap music like me. But that was sort of not really progress, that most of this was being done by projects that were built many, many decades ago. And if we advance now to the current day, rooftop solar it's not just a significant portion of the renewables mix at 11.2% of total electricity supply. It's a really big heavy hitter. It's more significant than gas, wind as well, more significant than gas. And they're now kind of serious sources of power in their own right, let alone as part of a group in renewables. And the same with large-scale solar. Large-scale solar will overtake gas next year or this year, probably, almost certainly. So we're now getting to a stage where we're seeing some really important milestones this year that I think are showing what this industry is capable of, and we should be celebrating. But yeah, look, I suppose the disappointing part of this year was, we saw a significant drop off in commitments to new project construction in 2023. That came against what was a fantastic year last year. In 2022. We based on our numbers, which are not all completely aligned with Clean Energy Council numbers, I should let you know, because these numbers are picking up national numbers that also include off-grid and Northern Territory. It's fully comprehensive numbers that we have here in our database. But we went past 5 gigawatts of commitments in 2022, which was fantastic, more than we'd ever done before, and it was sort of consistent with what we'd managed to achieve in fossil fuels in the past. So that was a stellar year, but then we couldn't keep it up in 2023, and we actually need to be going harder. We need to be achieving the 82% renewables by 2030. We need to be doing around 6 to 7 gigawatts or 6 to 7,000 megawatts, if we want to use the scale on this chart, per year of project commitments starting this year in order to achieve that target. Now, I think the fact that we were able to do 5 gigawatts says, hey, this shouldn't be too much of a stretch if we get our act together and governments get their act together as well. But we've got to get our skates on, and we can't afford to repeat what happened in 2023 if we're going to do that. But one thing that's missing from this chart is battery storage commitments. Fantastic year. From coming from nothing a few years ago, we have seen some fantastic progress with several gigawatts of battery storage commitments. And that's something no one was talking about a few years ago, that we'd see that happening. So that was a fantastic outcome this year in terms of commitments to new battery storage projects.
Tristan, this is your timekeeper. I'm going to need you to wind up in 3 minutes. Thanks.
Okay, last slide. We shouldn't forget small scale rooftop solar PV. That is a heavy hitter in its own right, with the consistently doing around 3,000 megawatts per annum since 2020. So we saw a bit of a drop off in 2022, and then we saw that huge spike in electricity prices, and households just flocked to solar as a consequence. And that's being driven by an industry that's consistently upscaling to larger and larger systems. So I'll leave it there and look forward to the discussion. Thanks, Anna.
Fantastic. That's a great quick overview. Thanks so much, Tristan. And can I ask all of our panelists to come back in? You're getting lots of thumbs up and love from the audience here, Tristan. I think there's a lot of excitement from the from everyone about what has been achieved. So let me once again welcome Joseph, who wasn't here earlier to hear my welcome when I introduced him, Regional Head of Tesla Energy and a Director of Tesla Motors, sitting in his Tesla as we speak. Always driving advertising, aren't you?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Is the car driving itself or just
well, someone's driving it. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, welcome everybody. We've got about half an hour for a bit of a discussion about some of the key stats and facts that we've been taken through here. In a message to the audience, if you have a question that you're desperate to ask, could you please pop it in the Q&A, and I'll be monitoring that as we go and trying to weave your questions in. So let's get going with a question to Joseph, really about the standout year for utility scale battery deployment. What's driving that? Why have we suddenly seen it? I remember a couple of years ago, Joseph, when we were sitting in sort of conferences going about what are we going to have to do to get utility scale batteries going? Lots of people are putting it in their planning applications, but are we actually seeing them being built? No, we're not. Suddenly we've got financial investment decisions coming thick and fast. What's going on?
Yeah. I mean, there's a few complex drivers going on in the storage market, both residential and utility scale. And as we went through with the data in the Clean Energy Report, last year was a record year for all of the deliveries of utility scale storage. And some of the drivers behind that are like there's some fundamental market capacity issues going on. So we are seeing more volatility. We're seeing longer duration of those volatility price events. And I think as I think, Tristan, we've been discussing for quite a while, it's an energy only market in the NEM. So it's those long durations of supply constraints which are driving those investment decisions. So that is part one. The fundamental market is we're getting those, those market signals from the energy market to put capacity in. The other side of that is we are seeing direct government investment, and we've seen that through the SEC's great project with the Melton Energy Renewable Hub in Western Victoria. We're also seeing in Queensland, we are seeing that with the government-owned Gencos there, so the Stanwell, the CS Energy, and the like, investing directly in capacity. And part of that is because we need that scheduled capacity, so that the ability to be able to provide power and dispatch as a scheduled generator in the NEM. And to do that, as we are moving forward in time, we are seeing traditional scheduled generation, which traditionally, synchronous generators and coal-fired or oil-fired, gas-fired generators, they are not coming online. So that capacity shortfall is being filled in through here. And so now we're seeing market mechanisms catching up with that. So direct investment to fill that gap, and market mechanisms coming up through with the CIS, for example, which is coming through at the moment to provide that missing link through for that scheduled capacity. So there's a few drivers both on the policy side and on the market fundamental side which are driving that.
And to what degree is negative pricing really also driving this investment, Joseph?
Yeah, and so negative pricing. So in the early days, you saw negative pricing occasionally, but now it's almost a daily appearance, particularly in the shoulder periods and the summer periods. And so negative pricing causes just the price such that the marginal generator costs more to disconnect than it does to stay connected. Now the benefits of storage are because it operates, of course, as a load and as a generator. In those periods of negative pricing, you are paid to charge, which initially it's pretty hard to comprehend, what you actually paid to actually charge your battery. But once that's done, that actually effectively increases the arbitrage value, the split between your charge price and your discharge price. So it increases the economic benefit of dispatching into the market when subsequently the price increases because the marginal generator is no longer solar, it's something else as it starts to peak up. So effectively, that is then increasing the business case, or in storage, they call it the levelized cost of storage. So how much it costs to provide that megawatt hour. By having a negative charge price, it basically offsets the discharge price. So it's the net between the two values. So that of course is driving a lot of that, as well as what traditional cap contracts are. So that
And-
again is adding to it. Yeah.
Great. Well, so that's a great overview, and there's quite a few different things going on that are really leading to this real uptick that we've seen. We are not, however, seeing the same, I guess, level of investment matching forecasts or exceeding it forecasts in the small scale, in the behind the meter battery. Why is that?
Yeah.
Do you think you would have a bit of information, I imagine, from of consumer decision making? What's going on?
Yeah. So so the data which we see suggests it's around about a 10% attachment rate of new solar we're putting storage on. I think that we see that generally through the data reported. And look, Australians, we love solar, and we're putting residential solar on, and it's something it's quite easy. It's an easy value proposition for solar itself to put onto your home. You know how many kilowatt hours you're using. You know how much you're exporting. You know we can roughly overlay the demand and supply. There's a feed-in tariff, and it's something that makes sense. And then the feedback kind of is intuitive. I think with storage, I think it is a more complex decision for the customers to invest in storage for self-consumption, which is the primary driver of the value of storage. So instead of exporting to, your solar to the street and getting a feed-in tariff price, which is rapidly approaching the marginal price, which is effectively zero for the solar. So you might get 4 cents exporting it, but when you're importing it, you might be paying 30 cents plus. That difference, that arbitrage is self-consumption, and that drives the storage discussion. So that value proposition is harder for the consumer to understand compared to normal solar. That's part one. And part two is the additional value streams from VPP operation or providing backup or whatever they are also hard to commercialize and monetize for the end consumer. So we are starting to see that happen through, and that comes through as part of the retail offers in VPP and some of the retailers offering more innovative products. We're seeing that coming through. But I think that's part two. Part three is fundamentally there is no rebate for installing a battery, whereas for a solar we have the LGC or the solar the forward RECs coming through, which you can claim for the production of your system. There's nothing really exists for the battery. It's a benefit to the system because it's flattening the duck curve, and we all need to do it. But we're not seeing that yet. And there is discussion about the SRES taking into account, the firm battery coming in. So it's having an offset or something which can be claimed to offset the capex of that initial investment, which would encourage the uptake, in my opinion.
So we're seeing strong, there's strong system benefits for batteries, but we're not really seeing any sort of key, I guess, incentives that are going to help push that consumer decision to make that quite substantial upfront investment in a battery. Kane, I'll bring you in here because I know the CEC, I think it was last week, has just launched a bit of a campaign about it being time to back home batteries. Can you tell us about what the ask is there?
Yeah, absolutely, Anna. I mean, I think Joseph's just done a good job of summarising the sort of dynamics and, if you like, the value proposition for batteries in the home. I think what we see today is particularly, we see a number of battery rebate programs that have been introduced at the state level around the country. Some of those fairly modest programs, but what they've done is they've demonstrated that with some level of upfront rebate, it really helps to overcome some of those challenges and to incentivize households to take up batteries. And so we think it's time for a national program. I think the federal government here in Australia, I think, has done a very strong job of putting together all of the different bits of policy needed to manage the energy transition and achieve 82% renewables by 2030. We think the final piece of the jigsaw puzzle really is to support home batteries. That's why we've been advocating for a home battery saver program, which would really be an upfront rebate for households. And the analysis that we've done show that obviously will save the homeowner who takes up a battery over $1,000 per annum on their power bill. but it will also deliver net savings to all electricity customers because of the sort of system benefits that Joseph alluded to. So we think that's been the missing piece of the jigsaw puzzle. We think the proposal is a strong one. As Joseph said, it can leverage from the existing small-scale renewable energy scheme and the incentive program that's in place for solar. We think it'd be relatively straightforward to expand that to also support householders to take up batteries. And the business case is very strong. And I think it's fair to say, it's something that we're encouraging and working with government to understand and take forward.
Excellent. Well, let's hope that the government is all ears ahead of the federal budget, and we might see some response to that in the coming months. Tristan, just briefly, I noticed that there is a question in the chat. Do you think the future for battery storage lies more in utility scale rather than residential? Could you keep your answer brief, please?
Okay, Joseph might have more insights on this, but I'm optimistic about the customer embedded batteries, because we pay very high costs for network services in Australia, and so a battery that's installed at the customer premise can avoid all of those very significant costs associated with network provision. So I look at those economics and think that looks pretty compelling, and really we can coordinate these things such that they can behave in a way that's very similar to a utility scale battery, or the thing that's being pushed, which I'm not a massive fan of, which is network owned batteries. So household batteries can operate in a way where they will optimize benefits, not just for that individual household, but for the community and the system as a whole.
Joseph?
Yeah. Thanks, Anna, and thanks, Tristan. So look, our view on this is you need to do both. It's not a silver
all of the
bullet
above,
to utility or residential. Our experience to date is it's the scale in which you can do utility scale is faster, because just the unit size, like a residential battery is 13.5 kilowatt hours. A utility scale battery is 4 megawatt hours, so the order of magnitude there and the efficiencies are there. But to Tristan's point, the cheapest possible energy a consumer can have is self-consumption of their own solar and not going through the distribution or the transmission network, right? And to offset that whole peak demand, which we need to meet within the NEM or the Swiss. So I think, but the short answer is you need to do both.
all of the above.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, listen, let's pivot now to the large scale sector, in which we've heard today a bit in the press over recent months and the last year as well, that there's been some significant headwinds in terms of large scale generation projects. Alison, you are General Manager for Development for Atmos. Tell me, what do you see as being the major barriers from a development point of view for large-scale generation projects?
Yeah, so I think, it's the report provides a pretty helpful indication here, because I've historically seen investment in storage has been more challenging than investment in wind, particularly in the northern states, in Queensland and New South Wales. And yet we've had a bucket load of projects reaching FID. We've had the huge boom of storage last year, and we've had an absence of wind farms getting through. So to me, I think that part of the challenge is in having investment-ready projects, is in having projects that we can actually invest in. And essentially, whilst the CIS will undoubtedly send a good investment signal, and help, for example, where projects don't have PPAs or tolling agreements, or help projects which don't have perhaps investment-grade PPAs, which is a good thing. I think we really need to, I'm an advocate for moderated language, that the CIS is not it can't do everything if we don't address the two things I see as the major challenges, being the transmission build out on schedule and the bottleneck in having investment-ready projects, which means your planning and environment approvals in particular, and your grid approvals. And I think that flows through to other issues that are also commonly talked about in our industry, where we are going to have supply chain challenges if we're seeing a quadrupling of delivery that's required in the next 4 years to meet our 2030 target. If we want to, ease the pain of those supply chain challenges and those skills shortages in regions across, the developers, regulators, regional EPC contractors, civil work contractors and the like, we're going to need to see a coordinated effort between approving projects which can connect to the existing grid, and they will probably attract more, be more contentious because they're near a load, they're near a population density. And, whilst sort of anticipating the res upgrades and those transmission upgrades in the latter years of the decade.
So we're hearing that there's quite a range of factors, and I guess that's to be expected, particularly, COVID was a difficult time, and the war, the Russian war on Ukraine, etc. All of those factors have made some difficult conditions for major capex investments, and we're definitely seeing that play out in the renewable energy sector too. I think some of those factors that may have affected, higher supply chain costs might be subsiding. So hopefully we'll be starting to see that become less of an issue. But we've got a bit of a crunch also with the build and making sure that we can get that capital deployed and the plants built over the coming years. Kane, you speak a lot to, the leaders across the industry. What are you hearing in terms of, I guess, what are the major, issues that we need to address and really focus on over the course of the year ahead in terms of supporting, in ensuring that the CIS can provide some of the financial security and remove some of those risks associated with projects, and then complement that by making sure we can get them moving faster?
Yeah, I think maybe just to sort of complement some of the points that Alison made really well. Clearly the transmission build is critical. We need an electricity network for the 21st century. We've currently got one that was built around the 20th century, so a lot of work to do there. Grid connection has historically been probably one of the most significant challenges for new large-scale renewable energy projects. We've got a really great initiative and a collaboration with the Australian Energy Market Operator, AEMO, doing a lot of reform and change to connections, to the connection process, to the connection requirements. That's done a lot of heavy lifting, driven a lot of change, but there's more work to do on connections. I think Alison touched on, supply chain is challenging. Australia we're in a globally competitive market. What we are trying to do here in Australia right now is pretty well what every other country in the world is trying to do. And we saw that most significantly with the United States introducing the Inflation Reduction Act, which is really a policy, a level of ambition and a set of policies, the likes of which we haven't seen before, certainly in this sector. We probably haven't seen globally, probably since wartime. It's an enormous shift, I think, of the global dynamic. And Australia, we've got work to do to make sure that we remain globally competitive. And I think that's where the capacity investment scheme can play a role. All of the challenges we've touched on, the complex market dynamics, the global pressures, and the fact that the renewable energy target, it was introduced in 2001. It was met in 2020, and so it's essentially done its job. It's essentially starting to phase out, and there needed to be another policy to help provide that underlying certainty to large-scale investors. And so we're working very closely with government on the CIS. They released a design paper just a couple of weeks ago. There's some detail to work through, but they need to move quickly, and we're working very closely with them so that that scheme will be implemented, operational, and ultimately begin to start issuing contracts to underpin large-scale investment, so that the challenges we had in 2023 get overturned, and 2024 is a much stronger year for large-scale renewable energy investment.
It's a very important year in terms of policy, the policy platforms and frameworks that are really going to set the scene for the rest of this decade. Thanks, Kane. We might pivot now to the demand side. So we've been talking a lot about the build, but also what are we responding to? What's the pull factor? And if I can get the team to put up the slide about the corporate PPAs, the corporate power purchasing agreements, and what activity we've seen. We've got a section in the report on this. Some of that comes also from the BRCA, the Business Renewables Centre for Australia. Tristan, can you give us a bit of a sense of what's going on in terms of the corporate sector and what factor and sort of, I guess, influence that's having on the build in terms of driving new projects and making, providing the offtake that we so, desperately need to ensure that we can actually make these projects profitable?
Yeah, so we have this database where we try and track all major organisations' commitments to renewable energy procurements on a voluntary basis. And there's a number of really standout large Australian corporates that in the last few years have committed to wanting to be 100% renewables. That includes or even they may not be quite 100% renewables. For example, like BHP are targeting 50% renewables, but it's a really big proportion of their electricity supply, and it represents very large customers: Coles, Woolworths, Aldi, most of the major banks. So these are the sorts of people that are doing it, but also government organisations like Sydney Trains. Now, these came through, they started getting announced really and started catching our attention around 2018, and then got an incredible amount of momentum around 2021, 22. Now, whether we are seeing growth in the way that this is manifested is through buying certificates, renewable energy certificates known as LGCs, and then voluntarily surrendering them. So what you're doing is saying, I've purchased renewable energy through this certificate, which represents a megawatt hour of electricity, and I'm going to make sure that no one's double counting this and no one else is claiming that same unit of electricity by acquiring that certificate and then voluntarily surrendering it in the regulator, the Clean Energy Regulator's registry. Now that amount has grown from around 2 million to 8.8 million last year. And we anticipate that it'll grow to something close to 20 to 25 million by 2025. So from roughly 9 million to 20 million, that's pretty significant growth, and it has supported a lot of projects. There's been a number of major projects that have been committed to, which would not have happened without a major corporate signing a renewable energy power purchase agreement.
Well, on that then, I guess when we think about the CIS, is that likely to have any influence or make any difference in the corporate appetite for these voluntary agreements?
Absolutely. It still makes a very, very significant difference, because the pool of companies that feel the pressure that they need to be 100% renewables is not universal. And it tends to be concentrated on companies that have a major consumer household facing brand. And you're not really seeing this. And it's also a number of sort of local councils, those sorts of things, or government agencies. So it's not limitless, this pool. And really we see the growth in demand tapering off after 2025. That's when most of them have put their pledges in. And so the scale of demand involved there is not enough really to drive us to the levels of emission reductions that we need, and would fall well short of achieving 82% renewables. So that's why the capacity investment scheme, but also state government initiatives are incredibly important.
Yeah, fantastic. All right, well, let's keep moving. Thank you for that update on PPAs. That's going to be one to watch. We've got some questions in the chat about social license, and I guess I'd like to put a question to Alison in relation to your experience in engaging with landholders and neighbours and regional communities on the daily basis as part of your role in developing projects. What do you think matters the most in terms of our ability as a sector to bring communities along with us as we embark and continue with this big build?
Yeah, look, I think it's worth acknowledging, first of all, that the industry has come a long way in the last 10 or 15 years, including through the Clean Energy Council's own best practice guideline and the establishment of neighbour agreements in the wind industry, given that, inherently in the height of wind farms, wind turbines, it's the near neighbours as well that host the project and not just the landowners. And in, the crucial sort of involvement of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, given that they are more highly represented in the regional areas in which these projects are. So there's definitely been a lot of progress in addressing and improving the way that the industry engages with host communities and building social license. I think, as I touched on before, we're moving to renewable energy zones. We're moving to more angst over cumulative impacts. There's probably a need for a more proactive role from both the industry and various government sectors to communicate to regional areas that host these projects that there are benefits to these projects, and to better address and address these concerns about projects as well. But I think
that broader communications.
Yeah, that's right. And I really do think this will be a key issue moving into the next federal government election, which, we might start to see the campaign ramping up at the end of this year and early next year, depending on when that election is held. But yeah, it's I do see that in general, a relationship that is not always related to population density. Certainly that is a significant signifier of where you might have more tension. But I also see that the more you have clusters of projects in a system for longer, the more angst that is created over time. So finding a way to, I guess, assess things by their merits, communicate proactively, and identify that if a renewable energy zone might apparently have 12 gigawatts of energy in the public domain, that the sooner that we can understand these are the ones that comply, that achieve the balanced impact, that have addressed adequately and mitigated impacts and earned social license, the more we can also reduce that community angst.
Okay, thanks, Alison. Kane, I'm going to offer you a follow-up on that, because I know that social license is a really big focus for the CEC at the moment. What would you add?
Yeah, this I think is an enormous challenge for the nation in the energy transition. In fact, I think it's a challenge for countries right around the world as the energy transition accelerates. Ultimately, as there's an interaction with more and more communities around the country, I think what this requires is firstly industry to behave and conduct itself in ways that meets the expectations of community. And I think Alison's right. I think our industry has come a long way. I think there's been some great progress, but there's more work to do. We released a guide a couple of weeks ago for industry on how to and what the expectation is engaging with First Nations communities, for example. There is clearly work to do around environmental footprint and standards. There's a lot of reform going on around the country to make sure that those standards and expectations are clear, and then ultimately industry can meet them. So I think there's a lot of work at that level. I think benefit sharing is something that industry. We know that the clean energy projects have a fantastic and positive impact on regional communities, jobs, economic opportunity. I think making sure that those benefits are well shared, and indeed those benefits are well understood by communities, I think is important. And finally, to Alison's point about communication, I think there's a role for us to play in helping communities understand why is there a change to their community? Why is there some infrastructure coming into their region? Why is that important? What would happen if that doesn't happen? The counterfactual is important. The impacts of climate change, the impact on energy security or power prices if we're not building new infrastructure, and then ultimately helping them to understand the benefits and the opportunities that come with these projects. So if any of you follow the Clean Energy Council's social media channels, hopefully you'll see near daily at the moment, we're sharing some fantastic stories of projects and people right around the country who are participating in those projects to help people understand what it might mean for their community. So this is a really important issue. We're putting a lot of effort and focus on it as an industry, and that'll continue throughout the course of 2024 and beyond.
Fantastic. They're beautiful videos, so encourage people to share them. Finally, we've got 1 minute left and maybe a little bit less. So I am going to ask each of our panelists in the clockwise order in terms of how I see you to give us your hot take for 2024. What is your word of the year or your short phrase at most? I'll give you a group of words at most for what should or will be on everyone's lips. Tristan Edith.
One word. I'm struggling now.
Okay, you're last now. I'm going to go to Joseph Tadich.
One word would be optimism for 2024.
Optimism.
Optimism on the residential utilities.
Glass half empty. Okay, gotcha. Yeah. Alison Hawke.
I'm a bit more skeptical, but I'll say something more constructive than that. I think, coordinated focus on approved megawatts where there is commission transmission.
Oh, wow. That was quite a grouping of words. Thank you.
Yeah.
Tristan, this is your last opportunity. What's your hot word for the year? The word that
Clean energy can lower the cost of living. That's my
cost
my
of living.
phrase.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah. Love it. That's our slogan. Kane Thornton, last word with you.
Record breaking. I think we're going to smash our record for big batteries this year. We're going to smash our record for large scale renewables. We're going to smash the 2001 record for rooftop solar and for household batteries. I think this will be the biggest year, I think, and hope that the clean energy industry has ever had in Australia.
Ooh. Well, that's set the tone for the year ahead. The race is on, folks. Thank you so much for joining us for the past hour. Sorry about some of those little technical issues along the way, but we got there in the end. Thank you to our wonderful panelists for joining us and giving us your perspectives for the year. Have a fabulous day, everybody, and happy 2024.